going to say for several reasons. One is because I don't remember much anymore for very long. So I wrote it out. And there's another reason. I've reached the age where I need to really plan for all contingencies. You know, if I should drop dead here in the middle of this, I've got copies of it over on that table. There are about 20 copies of this thing, and if something happens to me, you just pick up a copy and take it home and read it, and then put it in your bird cage, at the bottom of the bird cage. World War II is a pretty big thing, you know, and I can't possibly represent the war. And it'd just be one person's viewpoint. And there were over 15 million people served in that war, and each one has a different set of stories. So, you know, you don't have time to hear them all. And I didn't bring many today either because we don't have time for that. We have a half hour or so divided up between three of us, so it's pretty short. Is there a timekeeper here? When my time is up, hold your hand up.
You are, and you've got about 15.
Okay, hold your hand up. When my time's up, hold your hand up, and I'll quit, because you can pick up a copy and take it home and find out how the war turned out, you know? I don't want to keep you in suspense. Well, first, a disclaimer. I'm a veteran of World War II, but I'm not a hero. I was just paying my dues like everybody else. I was glad to have that opportunity. Who are the heroes? Well, they are the ones who didn't come home, or who came home broken in mind, body, or spirit. Those are the heroes, and I think my colleagues would agree with me right there. You know, we're just ordinary guys, and we just were doing what we needed to do. And people stop me frequently and say, "Thank you for your service." I appreciate that. That's nice, but you don't have to do that. To be honest, I'm a little selfish. I did it for me. I wouldn't have done. I just did it for me. Well, anyway, our troops during World War II were magnificent. One of the greatest armed forces ever assembled. I'm proud of what we did, but in my opinion, the best troops to ever wear the American uniform are those who are fighting for us right now. And I said the same thing during the Viet Nam War and the Korean War. The best troops we have ever had were the ones we had at that time. So I really believe, in spite of how proud we were of what we did, most of us are gone now, but I still believe that the best armed forces we have ever had are the ones who are wearing our uniform today. And I salute every one of them. My great-great-grandfather's grandfather, so that puts it about 5 generations back, his name was Thomas Boone. And he served 36 months in the American Revolutionary War. As it turned out, my active duty during the war was 36 months too. So I felt pretty good about that we both served about the same amount of time. But he served under much worse conditions. Most of his fellow soldiers were his friends and neighbors in South Carolina. They were all in the South Carolina militia. They tended their farms and they grabbed their muskets and went into battle whenever the British and their Tory friends showed up. Thomas Boone saw 2 of his neighbors, a father and his son, killed at the same instant. They fell one across the other on the parapet. And he lived to tell about that. And I'm wondering whether their family ever heard about their service, because there were very few records kept then. So there's no record of those 2 men. He also was on the battlefield when Count Pulaski, the Polish patriot, was shot through the breast with a grape shot. And he and some other soldiers made a litter out of tree branches, and they carried Count Pulaski off the battlefield. And as you know, Count Pulaski did not survive that, but he was one of those European patriots who came over here to help us. Tom Brokaw has written about World War II and said that generation is our greatest generation. Well, thanks for the compliment, Mr. Brokaw. I appreciate it, but in my opinion, Thomas Boone and his friends and neighbors back in 1776, that was our greatest generation. Think about it. Only 1/3 of the people in this country in 1776 supported the revolution. The other 2/3, about a third of them supported the king. They were loyal to King George. They were British citizens and didn't want to give it up. The other third wanted to wait and see who's going to win. So here you have 2/3 of the folks sitting back there on the other side. Only 1/3 of the Americans fought for the revolution, gave us the country we have today. That, to me, that's our greatest generation. You know, thank you, Tom Brokaw, for what you said, but that's just my opinion. Now let's go back to 1938. Back in the 30s, as I was growing up, we had a lot of literature about World War I. The World War II flying aces were really super. They flew those little wooden and cloth airplanes, you know, and brave men, I'll tell you. And they that was exciting reading. So as a kid, I read a lot about the World War II flyers and the World War II troops, soldiers and sailors and so on. The books that we read and the magazine articles all through the 30s tended to glorify war. And they pointed out that, thank God, World War I was the war that ended all wars. Aren't you thankful for that? You don't believe a word of it, do you? Well, I remember finishing a book called Lest We Forget, and it glorified World War I, and I said, put it back on the shelf in my little library, and I said, oh, shucks, they've already had the last war, and I missed it. I had a lot of regret about that. In November of 1944, as I climbed the ladder to get on a troop ship in San Francisco, I had a flashback. I thought about that book in the library, and I realized how dumb a bunch of high school kids can be. You know, in 6 years, we went from thinking that the last war had been fought to being in the middle of a big one. I think it's interesting that the United States, for us, World War II began with a large-scale bombing attack on December the 7th. And it ended with a small-scale attack on August 6th and August 9th, 1945. The first attack was conducted by a large armada of Japanese aircraft on our installations in the Hawaiian Islands, and it involved dozens of ships, hundreds of Japanese aircraft, and thousands of bombs. The second attack required 2 airplanes, 2 bombs. But oh, what a difference. The first attack left about 4,500 Americans dead and wounded in Hawaii. The 2 bombs that we dropped on the Japanese cities in August of 1945 left more than 200,000 people dead, and many more died later from their exposure to radiation. And technology, of course, was the difference. On December the 7th, I was a sophomore in the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I turned on the radio to listen to Gene Artery and his Melody Ranch program. Most of you are not old enough to know about Mr. Artery, but everybody on Sunday afternoon listened to Gene Artery and his sidekicks, you know, take care of the bad guys and all of that. Well, this time it was different. Very early in the program, the announcer broke in and made the announcement that Pearl Harbor had been attacked. Well, that was a shock, a great shock to all of us. But the first thing we asked was, where in the world is Pearl Harbor? Nobody knew. Well, the entire nation was shocked, but everybody pitched in to do their part. And that's the thing I wanted to talk about today just a little bit. Was this was a countrywide effort. Everybody pitched in. Everybody. Some of you were little children then and may remember that. You picked up scrap. You did all the little things that you were asked to do to help the war effort. At Texas A&M, the college abandoned the 9-month academic year in 1942. We went to a 12-month basis. We had 3 semesters every year. We wiped out the summer school. We just didn't have it, but we had a full semester in the summer. So we had 3 semesters a year, which would graduate someone in 3 years. You make up that much time. And the idea was to get us into the military that much sooner. You know, it wasn't that they were doing us a big favor, they just want us out of here and over there. Many of the A&M faculty members were reserve officers. And they were called to active duty after Pearl Harbor. Students were dropping out to join the services, and that was the other thing. At A&M, every day I'd have one or two classmates not show up. They were there yesterday, today they're gone. They dropped out. They could not wait. They were afraid the war would be over and they'd miss it. Dumb, dumb, dumb. That's the way it was. As it turned out, the faculty members were being called into active duty and students were leaving, so it all kind of evened out. As our faculty decreased, our student body decreased. The classes of 44 and 45 had joined the enlisted reserve corps because the commandant knew we would get drafted if he didn't. So he called us over and said, look, you've got to join the Army now or the draft board is going to get you. So we all enlisted in the enlisted reserve corps and stayed on campus to finish our work. Well, it worked for about 6 months. 6 months later, the Army called the reserves in, so there we were. In March of 43, the classes of 45 and 44 marched down to the railroad station, got on a train, and we went to several Army camps, spent about a week or 10 days. They stripped off those Aggie uniforms, boots and all. We didn't take our boots with us. But they stripped off the Aggie uniforms and put real Army uniforms on us. Then they sent us back to the campus to finish up the semester. So we had April and May then back here. But when we got back, things were different. We got off that train and we didn't go back to our old dormitories. We went back to another set of dormitories, and at the front door, there was a sergeant standing there, left over from World War I, one old timer, old sergeant, and there was a captain there, active Army people, and they welcomed us back home. We knew then things had changed. No more corps games, no more fish and sophomores. We were in the Army, and we had a captain and a sergeant with each of our outfits to keep us straight. Well, we completed our semester in May, and then we got back in formation and marched down to the railroad station. This time it was a one-way trip. We went to different Army posts all over the country, and the Aggies were split up and integrated into the Army for the duration of the war. Our enlistment papers said that we were in the Army for the duration plus 6 months. We all agreed that the 6 months was the easy part. The duration might prove to be a little bit longer. I still remember that old sergeant that was assigned to us. He was a tough old sergeant and mean as a snake. When we lined up to march out of here, back to the station, I looked out of the corner of my eye at old Sergeant Woods over there. And there he was at attention, tears streaming down his face. The guy was crying, and he had been tough as nails. But he was like a mother hen, seeing, here we were leaving, and he was crying about it. And I think he wanted to go too. He was World War I, too old to go overseas, and he knew that. But I'll never forget Sergeant Wood. I never thought I'd see him cry like that either. Well, Pearl Harbor made a big difference at A&M. After 8 months of training, I found myself in a long line of soldiers walking toward a troop ship in San Francisco Bay. When I reached the ship's ladder, I saw a man in a black suit standing at the foot of the ladder. What's he doing here? He handed me a Bible, patted me on the shoulder and said, "God bless you, my son," and pushed me up the ladder. I thought, my God, they're going to hang us all, But, every soldier that got on that troop ship got a Bible, and I still have it. Well, after 28 days, we arrived at New Guinea and transferred to a replacement depot, and then 3 months later, the depot, all of us moved up to Manila, and we were assigned to units from there. I was assigned to the 37th Infantry Division, which is like the 36th here in Texas. 36th was our National Guard outfit. The 37th was the Ohio National Guard, Buckeyes. And I found the guys in my outfit had known each other since kindergarten. And they were still together. They'd been overseas 43 months when I joined them. They would fight at the drop of the hat. Two guys in my outfit were good buddies. And the first week I was there, they broke out into a fight. I mean, they were going after it. Well, I thought, those are good friends. I've got to stop that. Big mistake. Never stop a fight between two brothers. I tried to break up the fight, and in no time, they were both on top of me. I learned the lesson there. Now, a little bit about the overseas thing. Ernie Powell wrote a book about the war in Europe, and he went over to the Pacific and was busy doing that when he was hit by a sniper. Ernie Powell wrote that you could always tell where you were in a combat zone by counting the number of field wire lines along the road. If you look along the road, there's these, looks like extension cords, black field wire lines. If you saw a lot of wires there along the side of the road, you're in a rear area, you can feel pretty good. You're a lot of wires. As you walk towards the front, those wires will get fewer and fewer. And Ernie Powell says when you see 3 or 4 wires there, you might want to ask yourself, do I really need to be here? You know? When you look out down there and you see 1 or 2 wires, or heaven forbid, you look down on the side of the road, there are no wires there, turn and run. You've gone too far. Well, I mentioned that because I was on a wire team. There were 4 of us. We had a weapons carrier. It looks like it's an Army version of a pickup truck. And our job was to lay those wires along the ground, and we laid the wire right up to the end. And frequently, we would be standing at the end of that wire with the telephone so that our infantry platoon leaders would have a way to call back if they needed reinforcements or call in whatever they needed, artillery fire or whatever. So that was my job, to stand there at the end of that line and to lay the wire as we went along. I've got some pictures. I put 3 pictures on each table. If you look at the pictures, you'll see the wire team. We're having lunch there right by our truck. I'm the guy with the mismatched uniform. There's a story about that. When we got back from the campus with in our Army uniforms, we were here 2 months, and we sent our uniforms to the A&M laundry. Now, everybody knows the A&M laundry washes your clothes in battery acid. White shirts come out clean and white. Khaki shirts come out clean and white too. Blue shirts come out clean and white. So, but I sent my uniform there, and so I wore out most of it, but my jacket, I still had it. And you can tell I'm the guy in the middle with a real light colored jacket on, and that's because of the A&M laundry. But that's my wire team. Now, there's another picture on the table. You'll see that is an infantry platoon. That's on the road to Baguio. It's a mountain road. Off to the left, you fall off 3,000 feet into the valley. Off to the right, you're looking many feet up to the top of the mountain, and that's where we were trying to get. But you'll see an infantry platoon there, and they're taking a break. They're about to go in and relieve another platoon that's up at the point, and that's our wire truck there. And then there's one more picture, and that's our point. Normally, our point consisted of an M4 Sherman tank, followed by a Jeep with a machine gun on it, and an infantry squad around them. And that's what the point looked like. In your picture, if you look closely, that's not an M4 Sherman. I believe that's an M8 armored car up at the point. So there's 3 pictures on each table. I have several more up here. If you want a picture, come up afterward and I'll be glad to get it to you. I'm on the last page now. The pictures you have are on the road to Baguio, which was the summer capital of the Philippines. After we took Baguio, we went down to Balete Pass and took that. And then we were in the battle for the central Luzon. And we went up to the top of Luzon, the northern tip. At the northern tip, the Japs ran out of retreating room, and they had a choice. They could either swim back to Japan or they could surrender. And or they could run up into the mountains. Some of them went up to the mountains, and they're still up there. They won't come down. General Yamashita and his staff came in and surrendered to our division commander. Yamashita was later tried and shot for war crimes. And soon, President Truman dropped those 2 bombs, and it was all over. there were no celebrations. I can remember when we got the word about the first bomb and the second bomb, and then the word about the surrender. I don't remember anybody honking a horn on a Jeep or shooting off a gun. We just kept doing what we were doing, and we were still trying to get the Japanese to surrender. They didn't believe that their government would ever surrender, and some of them, well, they went up into the mountains and they died there. Well, we were told that we would soon move down to Cabanatuan, and we'd be refitted, get new clothes, and get a boat ride over to Honshu, where we would have the privilege of wading ashore at Honshu. It's the main island of Japan. Well, we went down to Cabanatuan, but thanks to those 2 bombs, we didn't have to go to Honshu. If we had gone there, I wouldn't be here today, because there's no question but what the 37th Division would not have come home. I want to tell you a little bit about President Truman's choice on the bombs. He didn't know about the bombs. He was just a vice president, and Roosevelt died. And then someone told him about the bombs. And then they came in one day and said, Mr. Truman, we need your decision whether or not to use these nuclear weapons or not, or whether just to go into Japan the way we had planned to originally. And President Truman was kind of a common folk like you and me. He said, well, let's look at this thing. If we go in the conventional way, how many troops are we going to lose? They told him maybe about 2 million. It's pretty bad. Then he said, well, how many Japanese will die? And they were told him maybe 4 or 5 million, because they're going to fight to the last man. He said, well, now if I drop those 2 bombs, how many troops are we going to lose? He said, well, pretty close to 0. How many Japanese will die? And they told him maybe 500,000 would die if we dropped those 2 bombs. Well, he did the math. It didn't take him long. Use the bombs. If you do the math, you would say the same thing. He saved Jap lives. Over in Albuquerque, there's the nuclear or the atomic bomb museum is there. A lot of Japanese tourists come there all the time to look at it. And the curator there has told me that most of the Japs really believe that those 2 bombs, as bad as they were, saved their lives, because they were going to have to die, every one of them. Some Boy Scouts came through. They said that as scouts, they were trained that when the attack occurred, they would bury themselves in the sand in the beach with a little breathing tube so they could breathe. And they would have explosives strapped to their bodies. And then they would count as the footsteps, as the troops, our troops went over them, till about the 3rd wave, and then they'd set the bombs off. Not a happy thought for a Boy Scout. So those scouts who've been there, they were glad the bombs were dropped. Well, there were about 15 million men and women in the armed forces during the war. Each has a different set of war stories to tell, and we don't have much time today, so I'll spare you the stories. If you want to talk about war stories, we can do that after the war. I've told you what I could do and what time we had, so thank you a lot for having me here.
Well, I had a real good story all cooked up for you, but my flight medical doctor back there slipped in on me, and now I guess I'm going to have to tell the truth. In Vietnam, we were trying to destroy the North's only steel mill, which was about 25 miles north of the city of Hanoi. And we had been up there, well, it took us 10 days before we could finally get to the target to get any bombs on it. We were losing probably 1, 2, sometimes 3 airplanes a day on these raids. By the way, my dad served in the National Guard in the 30s. My oldest brother in the Navy right after Pearl Harbor. He joined the Navy and served on the USS Boxer, a light aircraft carrier. My next brother served during the Korean War. And so when I became of age, I realized that there was no way I could not serve this country. But I was inclined that way So it was no big deal for me to join the Air Force when I was 19 years old. I was very fortunate that they had opened up pilot training to kids with a high school diploma. And as they say, the rest is history. On the last day that we tried to hit this target, March the 10th, the number 4 men in our formation, we flew in flights of 4, and a strike force could be comprised of anywhere from 4 flights to 10 or 12. I was flying the F-4 Phantom, which is a much more maneuverable airplane than the F-105s, which were used primarily as bombers. And so we would always have a flight of F-4s right behind the lead flight of F-105s, and then the last flight in the string would be another flight of F-4s. If the strike force were attacked by MiG fighters, the F-4s would all jettison their bombs right where they were and take on the MiGs. And we also had 2 additional flights of F-4s, which were there just for the purpose of fighting off MiGs if they tried to disrupt the strike force and keep them from getting their bombs to the target. About 40 miles from the target, the number 4 man in our formation was hit by anti-aircraft fire. It wasn't too severe. Everything was working in the cockpit, so he and his backseater talked it over and decided they would continue the mission. Then when we got to the target, as we rolled in on the target, he got hit pretty heavy. And when we would come off the target, we always had a battle damage check and a fuel check. And from a fuel standpoint, we needed 7,000 pounds of fuel to get back to our base. We needed 5,000 pounds of fuel to get to the refueling tanker. The flight leader had 7,000 pounds. I was number 2. I had what we call bingo, minus 2,000 pounds, which meant I had 5,000 pounds left. Number 3 had 7,000 pounds. And number 4 had bingo minus 5,000 pounds. I mean, he has got 2,000 pounds of gas left, which is not nearly enough even to get him out of North Vietnam and into the jungle of Laos. So after we're far enough away from the target that we don't have to worry about the anti-aircraft guns there, we started climbing so he could get as high as he could before flaming out and increase his gliding distance. We got up to about, I think, 33,000 feet. Leveled off and headed southwest towards the refueling tankers. But while we were climbing up, I'm thinking this guy is going to run out of gas. And the airplane is not damaged severely. I mean, it's flying just fine. So there's got to be something we can do to help him reach the tanker. And I tried a couple of things that didn't work. And do all of you know what a tail hook is? You know, it's the hook on the back end of an airplane that the Navy uses, and well, the Air Force uses them also. And of course, the F-4 Phantom was originally a Navy airplane, but it does so many things so good that the Air Force bought thousands of them. So I told him to lower the hook. And he couldn't figure out what he needed to hook for at 30,000 feet, but he did it anyway. And I eased in up underneath him and put the hook on the windshield of my airplane. Now, his airplane at that time, being out of gas, still weighed 28,000 pounds. That's a lot of weight to be putting on a glass windshield that's only about an inch thick. We had to be very gentle when we made contact. Just add a little bit of power, and sure enough, his rate of descent was cut in half. And I thought, well, this is working pretty good. The only problem was it kept slipping off the windshield. And the little quarter panels are made out of plastic and very easily broken. And I really did not want a lot of airflow in the cockpit. My concern about the windshield breaking actually got the best of me, and down in front of the windshield there is a very small area about that big that's metal. Well, the shoe on the tail hook is about the same size. I mean, it was hard enough with the windshield being about 10 inches wide and the shoe being about 6 inches wide to keep the shoe where I wanted it. So I came up closer to him just enough to move the hook down on the metal, and that worked pretty good. It didn't slip off as much. I could keep the power on for longer periods of time. We had been pushing him for about 10 minutes. I had also received some battle damage and was unaware that I was leaking fuel, but some of that leaking fuel caught fire in my left engine. So I had to shut down the left engine, and we ended up pushing him about 10 more minutes on one engine. All in all, we got somewhere around 88 to 100 miles, which was just enough to get out of the rice paddy area of North Vietnam and into the dense jungles of Laos. When we got down to about 6,000 feet above the ground, didn't want to press our luck with the parachutes, not having enough time to open, so we went ahead and ejected, all four of us. All got good chutes. I was the last one to eject, and I could turn around in my chute and see the other three guys, so I knew everybody got out of their airplanes safely. The first pair were picked up in just under an hour. My backseater was picked up an hour and 6 minutes after he hit the ground. And then that helicopter went off and left me sitting there in the jungle. I had to wait another 45 minutes for the next helicopter to come in, which was okay. I had climbed up a little hill. I like to think of it as a real mountain, but it really was just a hill, and found a good hiding place. I had people coming up the hill shooting and hollering and so forth. And so I was very glad when the A1E Sandys, it's an old World War II Navy prop-driven airplane that they used for rescue missions because it flew about the same speed as the Jolly Green Giant helicopters. And so they could provide cover for them while they were going in to pick people up. But the Sandy driver made contact with me by radio, and we had to go through an identification process because the North Vietnamese had captured plenty of our survival radios, and they had guys who could speak English, and they could pretend to be a downed American and sucker the helicopter in and then shoot down the helicopter. So he went through my mother's maiden name, my first pet, and my first car, and he says, "What's your birthday?" And I said, 10 March. And he said, "Happy birthday, Bob." So that, long story about why I don't fly on my birthday, but before that. But anyway, they got us out of the jungle, took us to one of our friendly bases, and got us home the next day. And it seems that the commanding general in 7th Air Force down in Saigon was really upset. He felt that I had thrown away a good airplane to save these two guys who were in a doomed airplane. Well, I'll make that part of the story short. McDonnell Douglas could build an F-4 in about 3 months. It takes 24 years to build a fighter pilot. And a fighter pilot is worth a lot more than $3 million.
Amen.
So I didn't let that bother me. The only problem is my wing commander had to go down and talk to the general to try to keep me from being court-martialed. He had to promise the general that there would be absolutely zero recognition for myself and my backseater for what we had done. He said, that's fine. I didn't learn that until about 5 years ago. He, after he had passed away, his excuse me, his daughter had written a book, or published a book that General Olds had written over a long period of time. But in there, it was revealed that that was the situation. 22 years after the event, I was at a military reunion, and a friend asked me what award my backseater and I had received. And I said, we didn't get anything. I said, we got a pretty good chewing out. He said, well, he said, I think I'm going to fix that. He had been the military assistant to Senator John Tower. And so he talked to Senator Tower, and 1 week later, we were approved for the Air Force Cross. And just to have the last laugh, the Air Force downgraded that to the Silver Star. The big dog always wins. But it was truly a privilege to serve. I like to tell people I retired after 20 just so I could get out and do something exciting. But I had a very exciting military career. Started flying jets before I could vote. And then after I retired, I flew corporate jets for the next 31 years. And had a wonderful career there. One of the greatest things I think that I was able to do when the hurricane went through Honduras and just devastated that country. I had flown for the Adolph Coors Company, and I called Mrs. Holly Coors, who was an ambassador to the Americas, Reagan appointee, and I said, would you ask your sons if I can borrow their jet? I want to take medical supplies to Honduras. Well, she just happened to know the wife of the president of Honduras. And she called her and said, what do you need? And she said, we don't need medical supplies, we need diapers and baby medicine. And that's what we hauled. But like a good fighter pilot, on a Monday when I got that word, I was scheduled to fly a trip, a 3-day trip. I told my wife to get together with the scheduling lady over at Gates Rubber Company and see if they could get some donations. Well, they didn't get donations, they got airplanes. And by the time I got back, we had 5 corporate jets that we had to fill with stuff to take to Honduras. And once the word started to spread, everybody in town just jumped on the bandwagon. We had more goodies than we could haul. And it stayed there for probably a week before we got in touch with Dole, who shipped containers up to the States full of bananas. They went back to Honduras empty. So now we had a way to ship everything we had. It was a great success. So for a 51-year flying career, it was fun and rewarding. Thank you.
My career in the military, in the National Guard specifically, is not near as long as I'm sure most veterans. My call to service came not long after 9/11, and we had a tremendous outpouring of individuals, both students in school, students who didn't go to school, folks even that had retired early from the military wanting to serve and go out and do the best for their country. So I was part of that group early on. I ended up finishing school and then joined the National Guard shortly after. This was in early 2006. But since that time, at 9/11, it was really an interesting time to see and observe how our country and how, especially the individuals here in Bryan College Station, were struck kind of by that event. And I remember listening on the radio to, I think it was Candy 95, and usually that's such a, they joke around and they have all kinds of fun in the morning, and it was none of that. And I was driving to school that morning and turned right back around and went home and watched the news. I totally missed that day. Thankfully, all classes were canceled then, but that led to me joining the National Guard. I ended up, I was thinking about law school. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do, so I could either enlist or I could become an officer. I decided that I was given more choices and the ability to help pay for school that I had just finished if I enlisted, and that there was more of a need for folks to enlist than there was for officers at the time. So that led me to join as an E4, a specialist, since I already had my degree, and got my training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And it was quite a surprise to me. I thought there was more of a separation, at least from the training perspective, from National Guard and regular Army. But in considering the time, 2006, we're in the middle of Operation Iraqi Freedom, just beginning again to go back into Afghanistan for enduring freedom. All of our training was together. It was all mixed together. We had regular Army Reserve folks. And so the basic training that I went through was no different than anyone else. And thankfully so. I think when I finally left to go to Little Air Base after a train up at Fort Hood, this was maybe a couple of months before Major Hassan went and sort of shot up that area that we had just gone through. If you'll remember that incident at Fort Hood, it was the medical area that he actually went and shot off all those rounds and killed those individuals. We were packed in there like sardines trying to get through the medical system and get our paperwork together to ship out. And so if you look at a room like this, imagine at least, I'd say 400 people squeezed into it, shoulder to shoulder, with partitions all the way through. It was like a maze trying to get through there. Barely enough room to sit down. And that was part of what every soldier had to do leading up to, in a training environment, leading up to going to either Afghanistan or Iraq at the time. And so looking back on what Major Hassan had done in that incident, it was very tragic. But all the soldiers that I know, and I'm sure throughout the generations of any conflict that we've been through, not a one has hesitated to serve, and they have many different reasons for doing so, whether that's family history, whether that's personal gain or career choices, or just simply wanting to help in some capacity. I think that's been one commonality that I've witnessed, even talking to veterans of other conflicts and veterans that live elsewhere. Service is the same. For anyone that's served in the military, their willingness to serve is the continuing the thread that kind of binds all of us together. And it's certainly part of folks who aren't even enlisted or who aren't part of the military, who are simply family members or relatives or friends, because being a paralegal while I was in Iraq, I was in charge of and responsible for soldiers dealing with personal issues back home. Soldiers dealing with divorce, child custody, loss of their job, loss of family members, trying to figure out how to take care of things at home while being another world away. That was extremely challenging because every soldier had something different, some different situation, whether they had family support at home or not, or their employer supported them or not. I was very fortunate to be working for the city of College Station when I deployed, and I immense support from them, immense support from the community, but not everyone had that. And that was something that was a little bit of a shock to me, considering the outpouring of support, I guess, from a nationwide perspective now. Veterans are certainly welcome, more welcome than they've ever been in this country, and are thanked day in and day out. But when you look at it from the soldier side, a lot of them personally have challenges. You know, a lot of them joined because they didn't have work, or they joined because it was really the best option for them. I remember being told as an elementary school kid that you can either go out and get a great job, or you're threatened to go to jail or join the Army, almost as a negative. But it wasn't until later that I realized that it was really a calling and something to be proud of. But dealing as a paralegal, seeing the sort of the home front challenges of having to take care of paperwork and family, and not being able to sort of hand that responsibility off to others. So some soldiers really were challenged in that aspect. And being on the family member side or being on the friend side back home, I'm sure some of you have stories about that very issue. In fact, when I first started to train up in Fort Hood, I wasn't gone 2 weeks. We had a big cry fest. Me and my wife and our dogs had a big cry fest before I left, and then not 2 weeks later, we had our first issue. And I had called her for the first time on the phone, and it was probably mid-July. And she said, "I've got a big problem." I said, "What is it?" "Our air conditioning went out." I said, "Oh, that's okay. I mean, you can call someone to get it fixed." They said, nobody's listening to me. I keep telling them that it's broken, and it's 120 degrees in the house, and our dogs are panting like crazy, and nobody's listening to me. I said, "Well, what's the number?" And I still had some time left. I said, "Well, what's the number?" So I don't know. I'm calling several people. It's like, "Give me one. Give me one." She gave me the number, and I called them up, and I put on my best general voice. And I said, "This is General so-and-so from Fort Hood, Texas. How are you doing, sir?" I said, "Oh, fine. What's going on?" "I have a real problem. One of our dignitaries in College Station, Texas, has their air conditioner out, and I think it would be a disaster for your company if you didn't pay close attention and go there and fix that problem right away." And I said it in a little bit meaner terms than this, but and I kept harping on him. I said, "Go fix it, go fix it, go fix it. It'll be paid for within the day if you go fix it right now." Sure enough, the next day, I went to a payphone and called her, and she said, "Yeah, somebody came out. I don't know where they came from, but we got our air conditioning fixed." And I'm just thankful that didn't happen before I was able to leave the country, because it would have been far more difficult. But those little things, those little stories make it that much harder for someone who has to leave a spouse or a family member behind. When you go and you called into service, I mean, certainly we love serving our country, but you can't really have it both ways. You do have to leave family members on their own, and in some cases, like my wife, she's very capable of taking care of herself and things around the house, but certain issues like that where it's important to have that teammate make it a challenge. And I know that most folks, when they hear stories like that, they sort of remember and they go, okay, that's why we're supporting our veterans. We're supporting their families as well. We're supporting their friends, that their service and the things that they have done in these missions to support their country is one thing, but really it's an entire family that makes that commitment. So that was just one small story. To talk about my service in Iraq it's sort of complex. I was exposed a lot to the cultural complexity of the Middle East. Our mission, particularly in a logistics company, as part of a larger division, we were infrastructure building. We were, again, you probably heard the term hearts and minds. We were trying to change the perception in the Middle East of America, of what America represented. Now that may have, without using a pun, we may have shot ourselves in the foot by doing that with the military, but we were working very closely with the Iraqi civilians that, in some respects, we intended to be our enemy. And working on building roads and refinishing bridges and building schools and trying to establish some stability in their government, in their system, was a challenge. We tend to look at our country as a separation of church and state, but the religious history of the Middle East is mind-boggling. And anyone that's done any sort of research on that knows, I can't go into all of it, but even looking at the Sunnis and the Shias and the Muslims of Arab descent, the Muslims of Persian descent, the warring conflicts, even internally among those groups of people, is not something that we as Americans can go in and just say, okay, this is how it should work. If anyone from another country were to come into our backyard and tell us how to do things, we might be a little upset about that too. But we saw people and we met folks, we met individuals that really wanted us to be there, that needed that support so that Iraq could be established as really a strong, independent government. But again, we're dealing with the Middle East. It's a very fluid, a very flexed area of the world, and in many cases, we just try to do our best. And I was called to do a lot of things not paralegal related, of course, as every soldier is called to do. We built fuel farms. The area where I was in, Toledo, it was a hub basically for conduit of all convoys and all air traffic coming in and out of Kuwait, going through Baghdad, going up to the north to Kurdistan and Turkey. So many of the soldiers that I saw were not native to the base, were not just localized there on the base. They were traveling back and forth and really just made a pit stop to see if they could handle things. We were in close connection with embassies and diplomats and army bases all over the country to try and make sure that we reached resources that all of the soldiers needed that came to our office. So we were very active in that respect, and I was called many times to help lead some refresher courses, either in rifle training or in, if you're familiar with the term IED, improvised explosive devices. Really, the concept of IED has been continuous through a lot of different campaigns over the years, but that was real particular for our campaign, and something that all of our soldiers had to be very aware of, because Iraq was not, the infrastructure you see even in College Station, where we have curbs and roads and highways and street signs and the things that we sort of take for granted, a lot of that's not there. A lot of it's desert, a lot of it's it's a lot of refuse, trash. It's just, I come to appreciate what we have here in America more, having been there and seen the lack of infrastructure and the lack of care taken to the communities that they live in. Having said that, they sort of, from a military aspect, they use that to their advantage in planting explosive devices on our main service roads. Lots of convoy traffic coming in and out of our base, heading up to Baghdad, heading up to the areas, supplying fuel to our aircraft and to our military, crossing back and forth from Iraq to Afghanistan. We had to face a lot of improvised explosives taking out our soldiers, and that was really, outside of the initial boots on the ground in 2002, 2003, that became the primary killer of our soldiers. So we had to do a lot of training on showing them what to look for. And you're asking them to look for glints and glimmers in piles and miles of trash, copper wires in miles and miles of sand, to identify these explosive devices that can be masked in any form and in any way. It was almost an insurmountable challenge to try and protect our soldiers to do that. But in my little world, I was able to lead just some small classes on things to help them identify those things. And many of the folks that went through the classes that I was participating in, far more experienced than I was in being able to do that. But bottom line is, we had soldiers from all walks of life serving in many different forms. We met many different local Iraqis that were welcoming us, that were wanting to help their own country and wanting to help what we did and help see our mission through. But a very big challenge, and the complexity of what we did is very hard. It'll be difficult to explain in a good 10, 20 minutes, but there's plenty of good readings that I'll share with you. If you've ever looked at the 9/11 Commission Report, that thing is an encyclopedia of information, but it does give you a window into what sort of surprised us is how the Middle East was viewing us and what led up to those initial events in 9/11. Plenty of other journalistic books and entries that, if you're interested in that, I can give you a list of those readings, but those really give a good window into the picture of what the conflict in Iraq was like, and even some of the conflicts that we're dealing with today in Afghanistan. It's very similar, and our mission is a difficult one. But I appreciate your time. I will say this. Last time I shared a quick story about teaching some of the Iraqis a country song. So I will tell you that in one of my construction builds, we had a little downtime, so I taught some of the Iraqis how to sing "All My Exes Live in Texas." I did not, out of good faith and being a law-abiding paralegal, I did not record that for safekeeping. I probably should have, but it was one of those times, and I just taught them, "All my exes live in Texas," and they would sing it perfectly back to me, and then add their own little twist at the end. "All my exes live in Texas," and they do that, or they dance in circles, or they'd hold hands, and they did their own thing, but it was their own twist, and I thought it was so perfect for how we tried to bridge that gap between our cultures. And I'll always have that memory with me. But just to say that we did gain a lot of ground in teaching the younger generation especially that we're not this evil Satan, that we are people too, and that even though we're different, there is some ground to be made on making sure that we can all at least get along in some capacity. But anyway, thank you.